awareness amongst NHS staff to ensure that they have the skills to identify and to refer patients where appropriate, and also, of course, to address the issue of NHS staff who are victims themselves.
Sarah Jones.
Question 12, Mr Speaker.
County lines exploitation has a devastating impact on our communities, and we of course recognise the risks of girls and young women who are exploited by these ruthless gangs, including often for sexual exploitation. The NCA threat assessment published last year sets out the scale of the issue and the level of exploitation faced by women and girls, and this is why we're investing £25 million to disrupt county line gangs and put an end to this exploitation.
Sarah Jones.
Thank the Minister for that answer. We think at least 1 in 10 people involved in county lines are girls, and we think it's probably a lot higher than that. Her Majesty's Inspectorate has just published a report looking at the way the police and the NCA are dealing with county lines, and they have a number of really excellent recommendations, many of them about how different agencies work together. One of them in particular is a recommendation that by the end of the year there should be a legal definition of child criminal exploitation so that everybody understands what that is and what they should do about it. Does the Minister agree, and will she be working to that goal?
Well, the Honourable Lady, as her chairmanship of the APPG on knife crime, will know that the government is working on a public health approach to tackling serious violence. We're very much looking at the workings of agencies, including the police, and I know that she will welcome the fact that the National County Lines Coordination Centre has conducted more than 2,500 arrests and safeguarded over 3,000 people. But of course this work continues, and one of the many ways in which we support those who are exploited is to fund young people's advocates in London, Manchester and the West Midlands to work directly with gang-affected women and girls, particularly if they've been victims or are at risk of sexual violence.
Ellen Hayes.
Question 13, Mr Speaker.
I feel as though I'm earning my salary this morning, Mr Speaker.
Good girl.
Which is why I'm so pleased I'm about to talk about the gender pay gap. We have conducted analysis on where women face disadvantages in the workplace and are finalising sector-specific action plans. I can announce that today government departments are leading the way, publishing their data and action plans this very day. We want employers to go beyond reporting gender pay gap data to creating genuinely inclusive workplaces for everyone.
Ellen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Samira Ahmed's successful pay discrimination claim against the BBC will have far-reaching implications for other women working at the BBC who will now see their gender pay gap addressed. Samira Ahmed was only able to bring her claim because she knew what male colleagues were earning. What is the government going to do to assist women employees of the 1.3 million small and medium-sized enterprises who are currently reliant on chance to discover whether they are subject to pay discrimination because there is no gender pay reporting requirement?
Well, I hope the honourable member will understand I can't comment on individual cases, but I met with BBC executives this week to discuss their overall approach to equal pay and the gender pay gap. I take the point about smaller businesses. We've been very clear that we need to gather the data over several years to see how it's working, whether we're asking the right questions, whether there are other questions to be asked, but we very much hope and expect that the approach to larger businesses will trickle down to smaller businesses, particularly with action plans.
Kenny McCaskill.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
As we leave the European Union, this great country has a huge opportunity to make the case for freedom and equal rights across the globe. We will be a driving force in the rights for women, including every girl having at least 12 years of education, and we will also push forward LGBT rights, including hosting a major international conference this May. And in Britain, we will continue to ensure that regardless of gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, or where you live in the country, people are able to live the lives they want.
Kenny McCaskill.
Torness Power Station in my constituency is protected by the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. Female officers are now expected to work until 67. Does the Minister accept that, as well as the injustice to women who have lost their state pension entitlements, that there's an injustice to women officers in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary expected to do a job that's physically and arduous and demanding at an age that's inappropriate? Should the maxim not be dignity in retirement rather than work until you drop?
Well, on the subject of women working, I think one of the great things that this government did early in the 2010s was make sure that we don't have compulsory retirement and we do take advantage of the skills of older people into their 60s and 70s. I mean, the specific issue, I'm very happy to take that up with the relevant department. But in general, I think it's right that we have more flexibility and more opportunity for older people.
Craig Tracy.
Mr Speaker, last year the Women Enterprise APPG launched its first report, Pathways to Progress, which drew on the experiences of a large number of female business owners and gives recommendations to government, financial institutions and business on how we can encourage more female entrepreneurs to start or scale their business. So will the Minister meet with me to discuss how we can best unlock this opportunity, which has the potential to add an extra £250 billion to the UK economy?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. There's a huge opportunity to get more people starting their own businesses, more women in particular. I'd be delighted to meet with my honourable friend and work with the APPG to make it happen.
John Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary's response to the race relations was actually quite damaging, and I'm really pleased that the Minister's listening to the Labour MPs on this side of the House, but I do wonder, can the Minister clarify what is happening with the government's race and disparity unit, and can she outline steps that she's taking to address the fact that there are no women of colour in top civil service jobs?
Well, I think the Home Secretary was absolutely reflecting the fact that Britain is a great country to live and we have very low levels of discrimination compared to the rest of the world. Of course, there's always more we can do, and that is what this department is about. It's removing the barriers that are based on race or gender or disability and making sure people can thrive. But I'm proud of the fact that our Home Secretary is from an ethnic minority, our Chancellor is from an ethnic minority, and we've also had 2 female Prime Ministers. How's that going for the Labour Party?
Ben Spencer.
Mr Speaker, constituents in Runnymede and Weybridge struggled last year with access to Weybridge Station due to a broken lift. Thankfully, this is now fixed. But can the Minister reassure my constituents that ensuring accessibility for all is a priority for government-awarded franchises and contracts?
Far too many times I see people not able to get around on our rail network because of connections and exactly what the new honourable member has raised. As Employment Minister, that's a real concern. I'll be taking that access of opportunity of getting on in life and getting out and about because of broken lists affecting people is just plain wrong. I'll be taking that up with Transport Ministers on his behalf.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. Her Majesty's Crown Prosecution Service Inspectorate recently linked a steep and alarming decline in rape convictions with cuts to the criminal justice system which have left it close to breaking point. What representations is the Minister making to the Ministry of Justice and the Treasury to ensure that rape victims are able to access justice?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question. She will know that that report was part of the government's review into rape and how the criminal justice system is dealing with it. The review is still ongoing. There are other aspects we're looking at, including, of course, the conduct of the police in rape investigations and how the criminal justice system is treating victims with the rates of attrition. In terms of discussions with the Ministry of Justice, the Lord Chancellor is as committed to this review as the Home Secretary and I am, and we are very much expecting at the end of the review to come up with some very, very meaty proposals to ensure that victims of rape and sexual assault get the justice they deserve.
We now come to business questions. Valerie Batt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Leader of the House please give us the forthcoming business?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The business for next week will include Monday, the 27th of January, second reading of the NHS funding bill. Tuesday, the 28th of January, committee and remaining stages of the direct payments to farmers legislative continuity bill, followed by motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the draft release of prisoners, alteration of relevant proportion of sentence order 2019, followed by Motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the Draft Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015, Consequential Amendment Regulations 2019. Wednesday, the 29th of January, there will be an opposition day, the first allotted day. There will be a debate on home affairs, followed by a debate on homelessness. Both debates will arise on a motion in the name of the official opposition. Thursday, the 30th of January, there will be a general debate on global Britain. Friday, the 31st of January, the House will not be sitting. The provisional business for the following week will include Monday, the 3rd of February, second reading of the Agriculture Bill. Tuesday, the 4th of February, committee and remaining stages of the NHS funding bill, followed by a motion to approve a statutory instrument relating to the Local Government Finance Act 1988, Non-Domestic Rating Multipliers, England Order 2019. Wednesday, the 5th of February, Opposition Day, second allotted day. There will be a debate on a motion in the name of the official opposition. Thursday, the 6th of February, business to be determined by the Backbench Business Committee. And February the 7th, the Friday, the House will not be sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for the business and for the 2 weeks and for the second opposition day. I don't know if the Leader was in the Chamber or not, but the International Trade Questions, the Shadow Secretary of State mentioned that the government might be acting illegally because they've included the Western Sahara in their agreement with Morocco. That agreement will be ratified automatically under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act in 21 days, so the time limit is February the 11th. I wonder if the Leader of the House could find time, in government time, not on an opposition day time, to debate this treaty. Could the Leader of the House also update the House on the possible machinery of government changes? Now, we've heard that some departments may be merging, some may be immersed in others. I don't know if it's another missive, Mr. Speaker, from, as they define themselves, the weirdos and misfits at number 10, if the Leader could give clarity. I mean, I'm assuming the select committees will actually parallel the government departments. I think particularly around the 31st of January we need some clarity around that. Now, just as the other place was starting to debate the withdrawal agreement bill, Mr. Speaker, the government were threatening to send them to York. I think they actually meant to say Coventry, but that would have been too obvious. But we on this side accepted their amendments. The noble Lord Battersea, who came here on kinder transport, wants to secure the same future for those vulnerable children. Like the noble Lord who grew up making an important contribution, we know that those children who have families here can make that contribution. So can the Leader explain why the government has important initiatives like the Human Trafficking Act and all those other initiatives that protect vulnerable children, why they are leaving these children exposed to violence, overcrowding and dangerous camps? This is the government facing in two ways. Laying a policy before Parliament isn't the same as an automatic right. Could I ask the government to think again? We are a compassionate country. Now, the Prime Minister yesterday said that the Oakerview report will be published in due course. HS2 is about capacity, connectivity and therefore productivity. The Oakerview report has already been leaked, so when will the government have a debate in their time? Could it be sooner rather than later? Because I know honourable members want to put down their own amendments and have their own views about which part of the HS2 needs to be done first. Now, I know that the Prime Minister banned everyone, bar the Chancellor, from going to Davos, but even the Chancellor is not clear about government policy. He said the government's first priority was to get a trade deal with the EU, despite already having started work on an agreement with the United States. So which is it? The Chancellor also said Britain is better off in. That's because he said the single market is a great invention, one Lady Thatcher campaigned enthusiastically to create, with no barriers, no tariffs and no local legislation to worry about. Now he said there's going to be no alignment. The Food and Drink Federation said that this sounds like the death knell for frictionless trade. They've said that their margins are very tight. So which is it? Frictionless or not? Now, the government has signed up to the Paris Agreement, so perhaps the Leader of the House could tell us, maybe we could debate it and get some clarity, how we negotiate with the government, the United States government, which hasn't signed up to the Paris Agreement. Could we have that debate or statement? We've heard that the Prime Minister will be meeting with Richard Radcliffe and other families. The leader will be aware that the British-Australian hostage Kylie Moore Gilbert has been asked to be a spy by the Iranian government in return for her release. She's in the same prison as Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashouri, among others. So can the Leader of the House confirm that the Prime Minister will be meeting with them? And could he leave the negotiations to the diplomatic service? We want these innocent people released as soon as possible. But on a happier note, Mr. Speaker, this week, on the 20th of January, was the 755th anniversary of the Montfort Parliament, where representatives of towns and shires got together here to discuss matters of national importance. We first sat in 1265 and hopefully will still be sitting and won't be abolished. Mr. Speaker, sadly, we lost Terry Jones. He gave the soundtrack to most of our lives in those wonderful sketches, Monty Python's Flying Circus. I know I used to repeat some of those sketches in the playground. One of those great programmes that the BBC do so well, and we hope they will have the freedom to do so again. But Terry Jones maybe had a message for both sides. For your side, you recall he said, "He's not the Messiah, he's just a very naughty boy." And for our side, he said, "Always look on the bright side of life."
It's not a naughty boy now. Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, on that last point, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her point, and I think we should all look on the bright side of life. I think it is a positive thing to do and good for British politics. The Right Honourable Lady mentions a debate under Cragg on the Western Sahara. The government will always listen to representations in relation to Cragg. The question is whether it is a suitable use of time. So if the opposition wants to make a more formal representation on that, it will be listened to, though the opposition days are coming thick and fast, and therefore any of these issues can be brought forward under those circumstances. Machinery of government changes. The tradition of this House is that select committees follow what ministries there are, and I imagine the House would want to follow that precedent, but that ultimately is a matter for the House. The Right Honourable Lady mentions these stories about their lordships going to York and what fun that might be for them. It occurs to me that when Royal Ascot moved to York, their lordships found it great fun to go up to York. So if they could do it for pleasure, I'm sure they might have a jolly time going there for business as well. More seriously, the Right Honourable Lady mentions the amendment of the noble Lord Dobbs. Now, Lord Dobbs is one of the most respected figures in British politics, and the campaign he has continued to wage for vulnerable children is one that is admired across the House and across the country. I would just point out that the reason for not accepting the amendment is that it is not the right place for it. Government policy to look after vulnerable children from overseas remains absolutely in place. 41,000 have come into this country since 2010. 18,000 Syrian refugees, not necessarily children, have already come of the 20,000 that the government promised. The government is committed to protecting vulnerable children. And this is really important. There is no change in policy. Simply the bill was not the right place for it. The Right Honourable Lady asks for a debate on HS2. I think we've got to wait for the report to come out. That I know we're getting leaks and titbits and excitements in the newspapers, but the House of Commons needs to debate once the facts and the papers are brought together, rather than doing so prematurely. Davos. I'm not sure whether the Right Honourable Lady wished to be there rather than here, if it's still continuing. But indeed, the Chancellor was there. And British people voted to leave the European Union. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is a Democrat. He recognises the result. And I think to hold people to lines they used when supporting remaining in the European Union before the referendum fails to recognise that democratic politicians tend to accept the results of referendums, certainly on this side of the House. Our relationship with the US is one of our most important relationships, and therefore I think what agreements the US has signed up to, or not, doesn't change the importance of that relationship. I can confirm that there is a plan for the Prime Minister to meet Mr Radcliffe, and I will reiterate that I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for raising this every week. The behaviour of the Iranian government is unforgivable, and we need to keep on pressing them to release people who are improperly held. I'm absolutely delighted that she referred to the anniversary of 1265. It was, of course, a continuation, not the creation of Parliament prior to those times. The representatives of the shires came, people like me representing their counties, and in our generosity from 1265 we allowed people from the boroughs to come in too, and so borough members came in and the towns received their proper representation. So whilst we continue to look on the bright side of life, I think that answers all the questions for the time being.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government are keen to move public sector jobs out of London and the South East, and Northern Lincolnshire is ideal. Could I suggest that public sector workers connected with, say, the renewable energy sector would be ideally located in the Humber region? And since Grimsby has labelled itself as Europe's food town for many years, perhaps the Food Standards Agency ought to pay a visit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, who represents Cleethorpes with such panache, is quite right to advocate for his part of the country, and I'm sure that what he says will have been heard, and that the Food Standards Agency could probably think of nothing nicer than moving to Grimsby, but it'll probably be a matter for them rather than for me.
Thomas Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by asking when Heather Anderson will be appointed to the European Parliament in order to fill the position left vacant by the election of the Honourable Member for Stirling to this House? We regard it as the utmost importance that our country is fully represented, albeit in its dying days of representation in the European Parliament, in order to oppose the direction that the government has taken in that body. And it would be wrong, I think, if either through administrative oversight or a lack of political enthusiasm we were not to be fully represented. The Secretary of State for the Cabinet Office gave a rather lacklustre response to my colleague yesterday in the House on this matter. I hope he could do better today. Secondly, I note that the Labour opposition is to have 2 full opposition days 2 weeks in a row. Can he confirm when the third party will be given an opposition day? And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to return to the matter I raised last week, and that is the claim of right for Scotland. Despite a rather awkward moment when the Leader of the House compared the constitutional aspirations of the nation of Scotland to those of the county of Somerset, a move I thought was rather foolish, but despite that, he did acknowledge last week that the claim of Scotland is something he agrees with. He seemed to indicate that it was in some way discharged at the Scottish referendum in 2014. Can I ask him to confirm whether he believes that the claim of right existed on the 19th of September 2014 and every day thereafter, or is it the case that a right can be invalidated and extinguished by its exercise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman forgot, absent-mindedly, to ask for a debate on this matter of the claim of right. But I am the servant of this House, Mr. Speaker, because there is one on Monday the 27th in Westminster Hall. There is a claim of right debate. So I am even able to deliver on that which has not been asked for, which I think is the type of superior service that these benches like to offer. Though the best I can do is to quote his esteemed leader in this House, who said that Scotland said no. And Scotland did indeed say no. It said no to separation in 2014. It decided in its claim of right to claim the right to be a part of the United Kingdom, and thank heavens for that. With regard to the question of an opposition day debate, I am doing my best to ensure that there will be some time made available to the SNP prior to the February recess. It's not an absolute promise, but that is what I'm hoping we will be able to do. And as regards the European Parliament, I can't think why anyone would want to go there for 8 days.
Uncle Baker.
The Conservative Party, I have absolutely no doubt, is a party of jobs, employment and opportunities. But it is the high street that provides hundreds and thousands of jobs, and it's under enormous challenge from the internet. I worked in business in North Norfolk, And I would like to ask the Leader, would he grant time for a debate so that we can help to level up the competitiveness of traditional bricks and mortar stores against this ongoing challenge? Because we all know the demise of hundreds and thousands of jobs up and down the land, which are dependent on the high street success, is something that's incredibly important to all of us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I congratulate my honourable friend on being a champion for the high streets of North Norfolk and making sure that they're well represented in this House. And it's an issue the government takes very seriously, and the £3.6 billion Towns Fund will support towns to build prosperous futures. And the effect on cutting taxes will be a £280 million tax cuts for small businesses, as the manifesto commits us to cut taxes for small retailers and ensuring that business rates are manageable. So I think the government is doing everything it can, but the government can't stop the natural evolution of the economy. So it's making sure there are advantages for high streets in future.
Mr. Manns, Ian Manns.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. I noted with interest that the Leader of the House announced that in a fortnight's time, provisionally, that there will be business determined by the Backbench Business Committee. Now, as the Leader knows, I'm not the chair of the Backbench Business Committee, as it doesn't exist at the moment. But I would be interested to know how the logistics of getting such a determined would be sorted out, since the chair won't be elected till next Wednesday, and then we're waiting for committee membership nominations from the various parties. So that needs to be sorted out in time for a debate then to be given in time for members to prepare for it. So the logistics of that I'm wondering about it, Mr. Speaker. And I'm just also wondering, could we have a debate or a statement in government time about the conditions in which refugees and asylum seekers are meant to sustain themselves while waiting for determinations by the Home Office? I'm afraid to say that my own casework load in Gateshead is very, very heavy, with a huge backlog of cases taking many, many months to sort out, well beyond the previous 6-month and 10-month targets which the Home Office set themselves and which have since been abandoned.
Into the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is just possible that the logistics for the Backbench Business Committee may be 24 hours better than the honourable gentleman suggests. It depends whether this hotly contested post is as hotly contested as it was last time. If it's unopposed, the announcement will be on Tuesday, as I understand it, rather than Wednesday, and then it is a matter for the parties to get their nominations in. I think it is manageable. I can assure the honourable gentleman we have discussed it, and then I think the point he makes about refugees and asylum seekers and the determination from the Home Office is one that the new Backbench Business Committee, under whoever's leadership, may want to consider very seriously.
Just to hope, everybody, with 35 speaking, I want to get everybody in. Some may miss out if we don't shorten down the questions, please. Let's help each other. Alicia Katz.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, Rutland and Melton, is home to not one, not two, but 3 geographically protected foods, and indeed Somerset boasts its own Somerset cider brandy. Would he be so kind as to agree on government time to a debate on how the UK government can best protect geographically protected foods post-Brexit?
Leader of the House.
The honourable lady, my honourable friend, is absolutely right to mention anything from Somerset, because she knows that wins me over to the side of the questioner straight away. This is an important issue. It is one that will be considered in the negotiations with the European Union and will, I'm sure, come to this House at some time.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Alan Russell applied for a 3-year renewal to his access to work support in October, and despite having chased up several times himself, it took my office getting involved to actually get his case allocated. He's still waiting without funding for transport to work and without support, access to his support worker. There are many other issues with access to work, so can we have a debate in government time so that it allows members to discuss these issues more widely?
Leader of the House.
This is a really important issue, Mr. Speaker, that access to work is there to help people, and if the system isn't providing speedy answers, the honourable gentleman is right to raise it here and with ministers. If he wishes me to ensure that any follow-up answers are received from ministers, I'll be more than happy to do what I can.
Kerr Bradley.
Thank you very much. much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend values the work of local charities in his constituency, as I do in mine, but they often struggle to succeed, and that's why next week I've organised a training session with the Charities Aid Foundation for those local charities. But could the Leader of the House find time for a debate in government time on the role of local charities in all our constituencies?
Leader of the House.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I commend my right honourable friend for the work she does. This is absolutely the sort of thing we need to be doing to help local charities understand how other charities make a success of things. I can't promise her government time for a debate, but I think this is ideally suited for a backbench business debate, possibly in Westminster Hall, when that committee is re-established.
Tulip Siddiq.
The Prime Minister will later today meet my constituent Richard Radcliffe, and at the same time there are representatives from the Iranian authorities in London today to observe the IMS Limited court case in the Court of Appeal. This case relates to the £400 million that we owe Iran as a country, and anyone with a passing interest in my constituent's case will know that the debt is linked to her imprisonment. The Leader of the House said that the behaviour of the Iranian government is unforgivable, and I agree with him. But the behaviour of our government is also unforgivable because we have not paid the money that we owe them. Can we have a debate? Please, I plead you, Mr. Speaker, in government time to discuss how we pay this money back to Iran so that my constituent, Nazneen Zaghari-Ratcliffe, can be returned safely back to West Hampstead, where she belongs after 4 long years.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Honourable Lady for standing up for her constituent, which is obviously right to be doing, and she has the whole support of the House in doing that on all sides. The issue she raises, however, is an extraordinarily difficult one. The British government cannot and must not pay or appear to pay, either in fact or in reality, money to allow people who have been illegally detained to be released. The risk that would cause to other Britons travelling abroad would be very considerable. The law must take its course in relation to the money that was deposited here, but it would be absolutely wrong to connect the two issues.
Richard Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, following the reformation of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Iran, and in light of recent events in the Middle East and domestically, as we've just heard, can the leader find government time for a debate on relations between the United Kingdom and the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obviously a matter that is of interest to many members of this House. It is raised every week, and the government hears that, and I'm sure the Backbench Business Committee hears that. Though, as an immediate stopgap, I would point my honourable friend to Foreign and Commonwealth questions on Tuesday, the 4th of February.
Turner.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. P&O ferries in Hull are continuing to exploit foreign seafarers. It's risking lives and it's costing British jobs. They propose to replace all crews now with Filipinos. A British rating works 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and is paid fairly. A Filipino will be required to work 6 months on, do 12-hour shifts, and be paid £60 per day. Can we have a debate in government time to debate this really important issue? People might die.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept the importance of the issue and the importance for people employed by P&O, British seafarers. I think actually it is more suitable for an adjournment debate in the first stage, and I would encourage the honourable gentleman to be in touch, Mr. Speaker, with your good offices to see if one is available.
Excellent. Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Leader of the House kindly agree time for a debate on the Wilver Neweth nuclear project on Ynys Môn? This project is important in terms of our balanced energy policy and approach to climate change, and it's important for jobs, skilled employment and investment in Anglesey.
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of investing in technologies that will allow us to meet the obligations we have undertaken in terms of reducing emissions. And I understand her and her constituents' disappointment that the project is not going ahead at the moment. However, the government can't support these matters if they're not right for UK consumers and taxpayers. There has to be a value for money consideration as well. And suspending this project was a commercial decision for Hitachi. But I do think that this is, again, an issue suitable for an adjournment debate, because it is so much a constituency-level issue of which there are broader implications. But may I commend my honourable friend for what she is doing to champion her constituents.
Marie Riedel.
Speaker, in view of the shocking news yesterday that Jaguar Land Rover had to shed 500 jobs at its Hellwood manufacturing plant in my constituency, can we have an early debate in government time about what the government are doing to support the automotive sector in the North West and what they will do to assist my constituents who are set to lose their jobs?
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, there are many issues facing the car industry at the moment, and there have been demand issues because of changes and the decarbonisation and the issues around diesel and so on that are affecting the car industry globally. It is an issue of great importance, and I think the Backbench Business Committee, when reformed, would be the ideal place to apply for debate.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The loss of a child, as you know, brings untold pain of a kind that inspired the work I did, led by the Honourable Member for Swansea East, on the Children's Funeral Fund. She raised last week the issue of stillborn children and their fate. Will the Leader of the House arrange for a statement by a minister so that we can know that parents of stillborn babies will understand what happens to those babies once they've died? And I end with this, if you will allow me, Mr. Speaker. C.S. Lewis said, speaking of death, no one told me that grief felt so like fear. Well, our job is to bring hope and love. And hope and love can trump fear.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I commend both my right honourable friend and the honourable member for Swansea East for the campaign they had on children's funerals, which received such widespread support across the House and was successful. The issue he raises, as I said last week, is one of importance, and historic issues need to be looked at. I will take it up with my ministerial colleagues and see whether there is any appetite or any ability to provide a statement that would be helpful and would bring people new information. And if there is, then I would encourage that to happen.
Jim Shannon.
In the last term of this Parliament, I approached the Backbench Committee to request a debate on the persecution of Christians to tie in with the a date in November. Of course, that didn't happen. I'm just going to ask the Leader of the House, is it possible to have that there brought forward? Very important. 260 million people across the world are suffering persecution, an important issue for many people in this House.
Leader of the House.
In the last Parliament, I know that a couple of honourable members were keen to ensure that at this slot every week the plight of persecuted Christians was raised so that it was not simply forgotten about. I am well aware that the honourable gentleman had a debate scheduled with the Backbench Business Committee in the last Parliament. I would encourage him to take that up with the new Backbench Business Committee, possibly even prior to its formation.
Seeley.
Much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Government on a generally excellent start. It's great to see the Leader of the House and indeed the Chief Whip. The reason I'm trying to sound ingratiating is that I have a question of caution. On 5G, on Chinese high-tech involvement in our critical national infrastructure and Huawei, despite very considerable public debate outside this House, there has been almost no parliamentary debate in government time on one of the most critical issues that will define the coming decades. How does the Leader of the House feel about this issue?
Leader of the House.
Well, it's a matter, as my honourable friend says, of the greatest importance. It is a matter that is important to our national infrastructure and to our national security, and the government is deliberating about it extremely carefully. I would suggest to my honourable friend that the debate next Thursday on global Britain would be an ideal time to raise this issue. It is clearly an issue that affects our place in the world, and therefore I think there should be some time to discuss it then.
Stephanie Peacock.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask when the government will be bringing back the domestic abuse bill? And further to the questions raised in the previous Parliament by the former member for Ashfield, will they make provision for banning those convicted of attempted murder of their spouses from recovering any joint assets in probate and family court hearings?
Leader of the House.
I mean, that is a very important point, the second point about family assets and people who have been convicted of crimes in relation to them. I can give, I hope, a helpful answer on the domestic abuse bill, which is to say that I would be surprised if it weren't brought back before Easter. That is not an absolute guarantee, as the Honourable Lady will understand, but it is very much at the forefront of the government's thinking and a bill that the government attaches great importance to.
John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could we have a debate on the role of the Council of Europe? This body becomes much more important now that we have left the EU, and his predecessor was very kind in saying that she would have a debate, but I haven't yet seen one.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the Council of Europe is important in its relationship to this country. May I again suggest the debate next week on global Britain is a very good opportunity to raise issues relating to the Council of Europe.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent is a childhood sexual abuse survivor, and she suffers mental health problems, including agoraphobia. Now, she was awarded higher rate mobility for PIP, a paper-based assessment, due to the issues she has with face-to-face assessments. Now, the card she has is a lifeline, allows her to see a counsellor to help her. But since then, the DWP has tried to force a face-to-face assessment. She couldn't undergo that and then lost her award in her car. So can the Leader of the House advise what I can do to help her get a paper-based assessment and give her a wee bit of stability in life?
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think all honourable and right honourable members feel in their constituency surgeries that some of these issues relating to PIP are the hardest that we have to deal with. And I would suggest that the honourable gentleman, if he hasn't already, writes to the DWP ministers to get an answer and see if there is any help and guidance that can come from that direction. If he finds that the answer is not forthcoming, then I will do whatever I can to facilitate an answer, and I commend him for the fight that he is putting up for his constituent, which is really the lifeblood of what all of us do as MPs.
Robert Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When residents first moved into their homes of the newly built housing estate of Gamesley, they were told, yes, the transport links are poor, but don't worry, a new train station will be built shortly so you can easily get into Manchester. Over 50 years later, Gamesley still doesn't have its train station. Can we have a debate about improving transport links for new build estates in rural communities so that we can finally get a train station for Gamesley?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, 50 years really is a long time, and the case that my honourable friend brings forward is one that should be seen as so hopeless in terms of administrative inefficiency. But can I congratulate my honourable friend on leading this campaign and making it such a forefront of what he is doing. I'm not sure that after 50 years this will be great comfort to him, but I understand that Transport for Greater Manchester is undertaking further study of the feasibility of opening new stations in the Greater Manchester area, and the Department for Transport is ready to discuss the business case with Transport for Greater Manchester should they wish to seek government funding for these projects. But I have a nasty feeling that answer was written by Sir Humphrey Appleby, so I would encourage him to continue campaigning in the hope that in the next few years something will happen.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House will be aware, more than aware than most, that the situation on the perimeter of the estate at times becomes extremely threatening, with abuse and threats to members, particularly women members, in my experience. Has he given any thought to the reintroduction of the sessional orders?
They don't work. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's such a pleasure to be heckled from the chair. I thought that had stopped with the last Parliament, but never mind. I completely understand what the honourable gentleman is saying. I happen to think it is much, much better in this new Parliament than it was in the last, and that coming and going I have noticed is much less shouty, which is a very good thing. I have an historic affection for sessional orders, but noises off our right that their legal enforceability is regrettably questionable, and what we have to think about is whether that could be given a legislative basis, but possibly government time doesn't allow for that.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Redditch stands ready to benefit from the 5G revolution, and Amazon is poised to bring highly skilled digital and tech jobs to our fantastic town. Unfortunately, the 5G rollout seems to have hit an administrative inefficiency, as the Leader of the House himself referred to. So can we please have a debate about 5G rollout so it can benefit towns like Redditch?
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have one piece of very good news, and that is that our current Prime Minister is a great cutter of Gordian knots, and that where there is administrative inefficiency, the Alexander the Great of our time will be cutting these Gordian knots to ensure that 5G rollout, which is a high priority of government policy, will in fact happen, and I hope that it will happen in Redditch before 50 years, unlike the railway station.
Patrick Grady.
Mr. Speaker, could we have a debate on my early day motion number 87, which pays tribute to my late constituent, the author, artist and prophet Alistair Gray, who passed away on the 29th of December and will be very sorely missed by the artistic community across Scotland and around the world. Will the government pay tribute to this genius of a man whose work enhanced so many public spaces in Glasgow, and whose plea that we should all work as if we live in the early days of a better nation has inspired so many around the world?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot promise a debate on Mr. Gray, but I will pray for his soul.
Mr. Speaker, given the discussions about the whereabouts of the House of Lords, can we have a possible statement about moving the House of Lords to Harlow in Essex? We have strong transport links to the north. We're a sculpture town. We invented fibre optics. We have an enterprise zone. We have Public Health England moving to Harlow, and we have a new hospital soon to be built in case our lordships feel poorly.
Leader of the House.
What an excellent idea, Mr. Speaker. Honourable members and right honourable members will know that Parliament doesn't have to be in Westminster, that in the Middle Ages Parliament darted around all over the country. It met in Leicester, it met in Shrewsbury, last Parliament to meet outside London met in Oxford, and therefore, if we were to become a peripatetic Parliament, we would be able to meet in Harlow and all sorts of exciting places, and I think his pitch for Harlow has fallen on ripe soil and will be very well received, particularly in the other place. I think they could think of nothing finer.
Rachel Hopkins.
Luton Station in my constituency is falling apart, the roof has leaked for years and it's not fit for purpose. I've heard many members raise their unhappiness with poor rail services, but I'd like to ask the Leader of the House whether we can have a debate on the level of investment in railway stations in large towns such as Luton.
Leader of the House.
It's a very important point, and I've noticed that there are a large number of questions raised on the general railway provision in this country. What I would say to the Honourable Lady in relation to specific constituency issues is that my Honourable friend, the Minister of State, is holding meetings with all members and any members who want to go, and I would suggest it would be a good idea to seek one of those meetings to persuade him of the necessity of what she is recommending.
Mr. Speaker, this House and indeed the nation was misled about the true costs of HS2. So perhaps the Leader of the House could tell us when the government actually intends to publish those full costs, when there will be an actual debate on the costs, and if that debate will be in government time, and if there will be a vote at the end of that debate, and what will be the purpose of such a vote.
Leader of the House.
I think misled, Mr. Speaker, is a harsh word. That the costs have risen, but I don't think there was any deliberate intention behind the rise in the costs to hide them away. Inevitably, these issues will come back to the House. There is an inquiry, a report going on at the moment, a review, and once that review is completed, I'm sure the Secretary of State for Transport will want to come to the House and explain what has happened.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With a majority Tory government now in place, it seems highly likely that most over 75s will lose their free TV licences come June. So could we have a debate or a statement to highlight what discussions have been held with the BBC, what the current position is, and whether there is any glimmer of hope that this very popular policy might be protected?
Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, it is indeed a very popular policy, and the BBC should think very carefully about whether it really wants to penalise some of its most loyal supporters and add this extra burden upon them from later in the year. I seem to remember the BBC agreed to take this on and has now decided that it's not going to continue with that. I think that's a great shame.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's come to light in recent weeks that the new MP for Bridgend has a backstory that is not necessarily fitting of an elected representative. Now, where checks and measures in the Tory party have proven to be willfully inadequate, especially in Wales, who is responsible? The chair of the UK Conservatives washed his hands of it on Sky last Sunday. And can I ask for a statement from the government to clarify to the electorate as to where the buck stops? Is it with the chair of the Welsh Conservatives or is it with the Prime Minister?
Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, we may only debate the conduct of members on a specific motion.
Tricia Gibson.
Will appreciate that our prison officers work in dangerous conditions, dealing with some of the most violent offenders in our society. But prison officers are now expected to work until they are approaching the age of 70, despite the serious health and safety implications to which that gives rise. Will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out why his government believes that prison officers should not be afforded the same consideration as uniformed emergency workers such as police officers and firefighters who can retire at 60?
Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the work of prison officers is, I think, work that deserves particular commendation, that it must be some of the hardest public service work to carry out. The question for retirement is one that needs to be looked into carefully, depending on the work that people do. But with an increase in life expectancy, it has been completely reasonable to raise the retirement age generally.
Very sure.
Thanks, Liz. Speaker, is the Leader of the House aware of just how many people around the world cannot fulfil their potential because they have no access to education? Could we have an early debate on women's right to education worldwide? And could we, as legislators, use our parliamentary groups worldwide to get working together to secure that right?
Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that question, because it is important, and it is an important part of government policy and indeed of the work being done by DFID to ensure that education is available for all girls, a basic standard of education, and taxpayers' money is being used to promote that. I think his suggestion that all parties in this House should get together to contribute energy to ensure this happens is absolutely right, and if there's anything he thinks I can do to facilitate that, I hope he will let me know.
Alison Thulis.
Very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we are over here, we are Oxter deep in Burns season, so would the Leader of the House like to congratulate the Bridgeton Burns Club on their 150th anniversary and the provision that they provide to young people, particularly in their schools competition, which inspires the love of Burns in children from the age of 5 right up to the end of secondary school. And could we have a debate on the contribution of Robert Burns to society?
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I indeed congratulate the Society on its 150th anniversary, and what a fantastic opportunity to celebrate it is. May I wish all Scottish members of this House and other members who participate a very jolly Burns night, or a succession of jolly Burns night, because it seems to be more than one particular day. And may I commend vast quantities of haggis be eaten, because you may be surprised, Mr Speaker, I've always thought it's rather delicious.
I think so as well. Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've recently had cause to try and navigate the kind of IPSA HR House procedures when it comes to what you do when you have a member of staff in your constituency office who's unwell. It was very difficult, very complicated, no fault of any one individual, but systems don't talk to each other, the system doesn't work very well. And apparently there is no HR function for staff who work in constituencies. There's this huge gap where they're not getting the support that they need. So could the Leader of the House do all he can to make sure we set up a good HR system for members of staff who work in constituencies? There are several thousand of them. And also do all he can to make sure, as he's looking at the cost that goes to IPSA and what we spend our money on, that people have enough resources to make sure we're protecting people who are unwell and need our support.
Yeah. Leader of the House. Mr. Speaker, may I make 2 points in reply to that? One is, if there's any honourable member who is having these sorts of issues, please get in touch with the House authorities to see if we are able to help, whether that's my office or Mr. Speaker's office or the Clerk of the House. Everybody here will try to help if there are those disconnects between the various bodies that serve us as members. As regards HR service, I hope I'm not giving too much away, Mr. Speaker, by saying this is being considered by the Commission and it is actually on our schedule of work at the moment. Margaret Farry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the major issues in my constituency, particularly affecting residents in Blantyre, is the alleged mis-selling of energy efficiency products of the now defunct company Helms, who were approved under the UK Government Green Deal scheme. Can we have a statement from BEIS on how they intend accelerating their own complaints process to ensure affected customers can get a fair and speedy resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, obviously, mis-selling scandals are extremely serious. I would suggest, in the first instance, that the Honourable Lady raises this at the next question session with BEIS to get an answer out of them, or puts down a succession of written questions. I think that is a more suitable way of doing it than at this stage having a debate.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the member for Garston and Halewood, quite rightly raised the issue about job losses in Halewood, and the Leader of the House responded saying yes, maybe a debate in Westminster would be a good thing. 2 years ago, I held such a debate raising these fears and threats. So may I suggest that we should actually have a debate in the Chamber, recognising the threats posed by future trade deals and the comments made by the Chancellor at the weekend and again yesterday.
Leader of the House. Mr. Speaker, I mean, I refer to what I said earlier. I think it is a really important issue and one that is part of an international change in economics and demand, and that the Backbench Business Committee does have time in the Chamber. So if the honourable gentleman feels that it would be more suitable for the Chamber, I think that is a route worth going down. Anne McLaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, my friend, the honourable member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West, raised the issue of the scandal of mis-selling of Green Deal products by companies approved by the UK Government. You know, I've been working on this for the last 3.5 years. There have been question after question in this place. There's been a Westminster Hall debate, there's an APPG on Green Deal mis-selling, and numerous formal complaints sent to the Secretary of State for BEIS, but there's no consistency in the responses, and I think it really is time that we now have a proper debate in government time, or a statement, as my friend suggested, because we really need to get a solution that works for everybody on this.
I mean, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes a very valid point, but it is something that we all recognise as Honourable and Right Honourable members, that using the procedures of this House is something that one has to keep on doing to hold the government to account, and it is my job to facilitate members in the use of those procedures.
Then Diana Jones.
Mr. Speaker, just on that very point, actually, of holding the government to account, the Leader will know that the public inquiry, the infected blood inquiry, is now due to report, it seems likely, in 2022. But in light of the fact that there are still concerns about the financial support and the disparity between the nations and the support they offer, and the fact that one person is dying on average every 96 hours and the lack of compensation, could we please have a statement from a minister to update us on progress on those particular issues, and also update us on the inquiry and the emotional counselling support that should be made available to people affected?
Leader of the House. The Honourable Lady has very cleverly ensured that she was called when the Health Secretary is sitting next to me, and therefore this message has been heard by an authority that is greater than mine in dealing with this issue, and there are health questions next Tuesday. But I can add that this inquiry is an absolute priority of the government, that recognises the dreadful, desperate scandal that infected blood was, and I think also recognises the Honourable Lady's formidable and right campaign to make sure that people are aware of it. The Department of Health and Social Care has increased financial support to beneficiaries of the Infected Blood Support Scheme in England and is looking at a matter of urgency, the issue that the Honourable Lady mentioned in relation to the differences between the schemes in England and Northern Ireland and Wales, and the Secretary of State is here and has heard her point.
Justin Manners.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents who are leaseholders recently received a letter from a firm of solicitors called JB Leach about some outstanding ground rent. Now, what was particularly outrageous about this letter was that this also included additional fees for late payment equivalent to 222% of the original ground rent charge, despite this being the first correspondence they received on the matter. I think this is absolutely typical of the way leaseholders are being exploited in this country. Can we please have a debate on how we're going to stamp out these terrible practices?
Mr. Speaker, it is an issue that the government is well aware of. And I think it is a matter that may well be covered by legislation that is in the pipeline, so I think that will be the occasion on which to debate it.
Justin Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago at Business Questions, the Leader of the House told me I was under a misapprehension when I said his government was shamefully backsliding on their commitments to unaccompanied child refugees, the most vulnerable of children. But this week it's very plain that they are backsliding. So can he give me a statement explaining, which he failed to do when I asked previously, what assessment his government has made of the impact of them turning their backs on the well-being of these children is?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is under misapprehension. First of all, it's my government, it's Her Majesty's government, and this is worth remembering. I haven't risen to such giddy heights, but the fundamental point is that government policy has not changed. Government policy is determined to look after child refugees. The point of not having it in the bill was that the bill was about leaving the European Union, not about child refugees, and that we are going to continue with the policy. As I said, 40,000 child refugees have come to this country since 2010. Is it a matter of high priority for the government? The commitment is absolutely there, and I'm sorry to say the misapprehension remains.
Last but certainly never least, Judith Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Leader of the House, indeed the whole House, join with me in paying tribute to rugby league legend Rob Burrow, who was recently diagnosed with motor neuron disease? The moving testimonial at Headingley showed the true spirit of the sport. And on the rugby league theme, following on from the prestigious award to our very own Mr. Speaker by the Rugby League APPG for his outstanding service to the game, can we have a debate in government time on opportunities that the 2021 World Cup to be held in England will bring?
Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, yes, may I join her in her tribute that it is motor neurone disease is such a terrible and frightening disease, and to be able to cope with that and to cope with it in public must be a great burden. The debates she suggests are, to my mind, very wise suggestions for the Backbench Business Committee.
And absolutely with Rob Burrows, I've got to say, I'm sure all the House would like to send him the best and support. We now come to the Ministerial Statement, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to inform the House about the outbreak of a new coronavirus in China and the UK's response to protect the British public. As of this morning, there have been 571 cases confirmed by the Chinese government, and 17 people are reported to have died of this new strain of respiratory illness. All the fatalities have so far been contained to mainland China. However, this is a rapidly developing situation, and the number of deaths and the number of cases is likely to be higher than those that have been confirmed so far, and I expect them to rise further. It has been reported that the Chinese authorities have placed further transport restrictions on the epicenter of the outbreak in Wuhan city, including on international flights. A small number of cases of the new coronavirus have now been detected in other countries, including Thailand, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the United States. Experts at the World Health Organization are meeting again today to determine whether this new outbreak now constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. Mr. Speaker, most cases of the new coronavirus so far have been non-fatal. In these cases, most people experience cold and flu-like symptoms and then recover. However, there have been a small number of cases so far where it's proven more serious and fatal. There are no confirmed cases of this new infection in the UK so far. We've been closely monitoring the situation in Wuhan and have put in place proportionate precautionary measures. Our approach at all times has been guided by the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty. Since yesterday, Public Health England officials have been carrying out enhanced monitoring of direct flights from Wuhan City, and all passengers on direct flights from China will receive information on what to do if they fall ill. Professor Whitty and Public Health England, aided by international experts, are in close contact with their international counterparts and are continually monitoring the scientific evidence as it emerges. The Chief Medical Officer has revised the risk to the UK population from very low to low and has concluded that while there is an increased likelihood that cases may arise in this country, we are well prepared and well equipped to deal with them. The UK is one of the first countries to have developed a world-leading test for the new coronavirus. The NHS is ready to respond appropriately to any cases that emerge. Clinicians both in primary and secondary care have already received advice covering initial detection and investigation of possible cases, infection prevention and control, and clinical diagnostics. Acting on the advice of Professor Whitty, we have updated our travel guidance to British citizens to advise against all but essential travel to Wuhan City. We are working closely with our counterparts in the devolved administrations, and the public can be assured that the whole of the UK is always well prepared for these types of outbreaks, and will remain vigilant and keep our response under constant review in the light of emerging scientific evidence. And I commend the statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Secretary of State for an advance copy of his statement and for updating the House this morning. The coronavirus is indeed very concerning, and I'm grateful for Public Health England and the Department's work on this so far, especially screening passengers on direct flights from Wuhan. However, a passenger arriving from Wuhan yesterday said that he had gone through virtually no screening at all, but was given a leaflet. So does the Secretary of State have any response to that? Will flights from other Chinese cities, not just Wuhan, be monitored, and when does the Secretary of State think monitoring might begin? Will there be specific traveller advice for UK citizens travelling into China who have existing conditions that may mean they need to take more care? Public Health England have assessed the risk of the coronavirus being spread to the UK as low, as he said, and in the event of the virus spreading to the UK, is there contingency plans and funds to prevent further spreading to deal with the scale of the problem? We are in the middle of the flu season, as he will know, so I do not want to cause any undue anxiety, especially as there are no cases, as we've heard in the UK at the moment. But can the Minister please advise people watching who may be concerned about their own symptoms what they should do? We all know that the NHS has a tremendous record in responding to similar incidents, such as Ebola and monkeypox. We can certainly be proud of our public health record in these areas and can be confident in how those bodies will respond to this incident. There is a chance that a global pandemic can be avoided if governments across the world take the right measures in a timely fashion. So I thank the Minister for his update today and would be grateful if he could provide some further clarity on the points I've raised. Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the cross-party approach that's being taken to this outbreak and the remarks that the Shadow Minister made, specifically on the points that she raised. On the reports from the flight that arrived yesterday, it's important that we get the enhanced monitoring right, and the challenge here is that symptoms for the Wuhan novel coronavirus do not usually appear until 5 to 7 days and sometimes up to 14 days, and therefore the advice is that the most important part of the monitoring is to ensure that everybody knows what to do if the symptoms arise, because often the symptoms won't be there for somebody on the flight. Having said that, we do not expect further flights from Wuhan because the Chinese authorities have taken steps to stop travel out of the city. She asked whether we'll be monitoring flights from other Chinese cities or indeed from anywhere else. Currently, the evidence suggests that the vast majority of cases are in Wuhan. Obviously, we keep that under constant review, and we will not hesitate to take further steps if that's necessary to protect the British public.
Robert Half.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Harlow, we have a big and vibrant Chinese community and a very large Chinese community centre. Could I ask him what information is being sent to Chinese community centres like the one we have in Harlow? And many of the members of the Chinese community have relatives in Hong Kong. Could I ask him to give an update on what is being done in terms of if this flu disease reaches Hong Kong?
Secretary of State.
Well, thank you. There is evidence of potential cases of the coronavirus in Hong Kong, although, as I say, the vast majority of cases are in Wuhan City. We'll keep that under review. The advice to his Chinese residents is exactly the same as to all, which is to avoid anything but essential travel to Wuhan City, and that the direct flights from Wuhan City appear to have been ceased. I would also say, of course, that Harlow is has an awful lot of people in it already, and more to come who work for Public Health England. And I'm sure he'd want to join me in thanking them for the vigilant work that they're undertaking.
Amber McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obvious that the scale of the operation at hand here shouldn't be underestimated. Shutting down a city the size of London as it prepares to celebrate Chinese New Year is an extraordinary undertaking. Can I ask what support he's aware of that's been offered to the Chinese authorities from the international community, in particular to the health services, as they cope with this unprecedented strain on resources? Some of my questions have already been asked, so I'll just ask about the World Health Organization meeting today. What communication does the UK Government have with them, and can he assure the House that the Government will remain updated in real time on developments and what steps, if any, are required in the UK? And finally, I have a number of constituents, as we probably all will have, Chinese constituents, and many of them English is difficult. So when we're talking about giving information to Chinese communities within the UK, is it being done in different languages?
Yes, on the point on languages, the advice will be available today in Mandarin and Cantonese. The UK is heavily engaged in the WHO response. And in response to her first question on engagement with the Chinese government, of course we're engaging with the Chinese government. Principally, this happens through the World Health Organization, who have very well established procedures to make sure we understand the nature of the outbreak, that the scientists can investigate the epidemiology and come to an evolving scientific analysis of what's happening, and then we base our decisions, as much as is possible, on the scientific advice that flows from that. The person coordinating that here in the UK is the Chief Medical Officer, who is an expert in these issues.
Jason McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many UK universities, not least my local Huddersfield University, have strong links with the Wuhan University of Technology and Science. What particular advice is the Secretary of State's Department giving to UK universities, particularly those with large Chinese student populations?
Secretary of State. Well, we're not giving specific advice. We're giving the same advice to everybody, which is avoid all non-essential travel to Wuhan. But I'm very happy to take away the point that we will ensure that we're communicating through Universities UK with all UK universities to make sure that the message gets to students directly, and they hear the advice that is there for everybody, which is to avoid all but essential travel.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts go out to all the residents of Wuhan, Manchester's sister city. Sadly, the news of this outbreak couldn't have come at a worse time as residents prepare to celebrate the Lunar New Year. Can the Secretary of State tell us what further things he can do in light of our expertise in this disease, particularly what you said about coronaviruses, that we can provide to the Chinese government And also, I think we should provide more assistance to the people who are here. Like in Manchester, we have a sizable Chinese community, again, bringing more awareness.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'll ensure that the authorities in Manchester are fully appraised and kept up to date with our advice, which, as I say, is based on the best scientific evidence, to make sure that Manchester and its sister city deal with this as well as they can, as appropriately as they can.
Alicia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, my right honourable friend, for the comprehensive update and particularly the detail on the tests the UK has developed for the coronavirus. Can I ask what consular assistance is being provided to British nationals caught up in affected areas in China and other areas?
Secretary of State.
It's a very important question. There are approximately 11 million people in Wuhan city, including British nationals. As far as we know, we have 2 UK staff in our consulate in Wuhan and 15 locally employed staff. Of course, we're ensuring they get all the support they need, and they are available to provide consular assistance to British nationals who are in Wuhan city.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The House appreciates the fact that the Secretary of State has come so promptly to make this statement. In the event of an outbreak here, which of course we all hope does not happen, could you just tell the House what is the current advice to members of the public about the use of face masks? Because one of the things about these outbreaks is people look at what measures are being taken and what people are doing in countries where the disease has taken hold, and then ask the authorities here, well, why aren't we doing the same? And it would be helpful to know in anticipation. Presumably this will be guidance given by the Chief Medical Officer.
Secretary of State.
Well, that's right, and we have well-established procedures for dealing with a potential outbreak like this, whether it's flu or a coronavirus like this one. Our advice at the moment to the UK public is that the risk is low. Of course, we'll keep that under review. We try very much only to put forward proposals which are clinically appropriate, and the wearing of face masks is not deemed clinically necessary now. Of course, we keep that under review and will be guided by the science.
Lanera Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the comprehensive update to the Secretary of State. We know that scientists are already working very hard to find a vaccine for this newly identified strain of coronavirus. And given the importance of vaccines in combating serious diseases, potentially such as this, would the Secretary of State agree that education about vaccines is more important than ever in this age of disinformation? And what conversations has he had with colleagues to combat fake news on vaccines?
The Honourable Lady makes an incredibly important point on which I wholly concur in the round, that vaccines are incredibly important and valuable, and we have a long-established process for working out where we should vaccinate. In this case, because the nature of the virus, it's unlikely that a vaccine is going to be available. There isn't one now. And so that isn't the route that we should be looking at, but of course we'll keep that under review. But the general point that she makes, which is that when advised to take a vaccine, like the flu vaccine for the winter, or like MMR for children, then people should vaccinate, because it's both good for you and good for your neighbour.
Dame Diana Jones.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for the statement? In Hull, in my constituency, we have a lot of Chinese students, and I just want to be clear what advice is being given in terms of if anyone is worried about symptoms that might develop, and the Secretary of State said that might happen up to 14 days after arriving in the UK. What advice should those students be given about what to do, who to contact?
Well, of course, anybody, whether a student in Hull or elsewhere, anybody with concerns should contact their doctor, and in the first port of call, 24 hours a day, they can call NHS 111, and 111 has clinical advice available, as I say, available around the clock, and all of the 111 contact centres have been updated and will be kept updated with the most appropriate advice.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister for his statement and clear commitment. Across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Mr. Speaker, you as a type 1 diabetic, myself as a type 2 diabetic, have a chronic disease. those who are diabetics and elsewhere across the United Kingdom worry about this disease and the killer impact of it. I have noted that the United States of America, Minister, have diverted flights to screening areas specifically. And the news this morning, I'm sure you've probably seen it, Minister, as I did and many others in this House seen it as well. The same flight arrived, 3 different opinions of those coming off that plane. One said it had no advice or discussion whatsoever. The second one got a leaflet. The third one said that they had some tests done before they left China. So it seems that there's mixed messages coming out. It's important that we have a clear policy and that everyone flying in here and every person here feels that it can be assured.
Secretary of State. Well, he's absolutely right, and we had for that flight a divert in place to ensure that it went to a part of Heathrow where there are the procedures and the processes to be able to deal with this issue. There was enhanced monitoring of that flight. Not all of that is immediately obvious to the passengers themselves, but crucially, we understand that the Chinese government has stopped future flights. But of course, should that, we'll keep all of that under review.
We now come to the general debate on the Holocaust Memorial Day. I call the Minister Luke Hall to move. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered Holocaust Memorial Day 2020. This debate is taking place on the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps across Europe. This brought an end to the murder of 6 million Jewish men, women and children by Nazi Germany, but as we know, it did not bring an end to the scourge of anti-Semitism. Today, sadly, we see anti-Semitism on the rise once more in this country, across Europe and the Americas. It is a mark of a civilised society that people of different faiths, different cultures and different traditions can live together in harmony. And if we are to truly value Holocaust Memorial Day, we will do it by remembering this lesson, that we must show tolerance and respect for other people in order to live in peace. That is why it is vital that we all rise to the challenge and rid this age-old hatred from our society. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember all those murdered by the Nazis. The 6 million Jews, the thousands of Roma and Sinti, the political prisoners, those with physical disabilities and mental illness, and those persecuted for their sexuality. It is a day when we remember the 2 million victims of Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and the almost 1 million victims of the Rwandan genocide. It is a day when we remember 8,000 Muslim men and boys murdered in Srebrenica 25 years ago. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember them all. The enormity of these numbers, Mr. Speaker, can make it seem almost impossible to relate to individual victims. This is made even harder because the names of many Holocaust victims have been lost to us. In Nazi Germany, Jewish men and women were forced to change any name believed to be Aryan to Israel for men and Sarah for women. Others in the camps had their names stripped from them and replaced by a tattooed number. Personal names that had been handed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, were lost or replaced. To mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust has launched a social media commemorative project. It will generate the name of an individual who was murdered by the Nazis. This will allow us to honour those victims by giving them back their name. Today, I will be honouring Johannes Degen. He was born in Germany on the 8th of July 1900 and was murdered by the Nazis for being a Jehovah's Witness. I hope all honourable members will take the time to take part and visit the Trust's website. But it is survivors, Mr. Speaker, that are at the heart of Holocaust commemorations. Because for those of us who have been fortunate enough to sit before a survivor and listen to them describe their experience can be in no doubt about the terrible truth of what has happened. Sadly, to this day, there are still people who insist that the Holocaust never happened.
Is he aware that many of us believe absolutely right that the testimony, as these wonderful survivors come to the end of their lives, we need to have the record. And Huddersfield Memorial, Holocaust Memorial Centre, an exhibition that opened by Lord Pickles last year, is a very wonderful resource where we have those recordings and children and other people can learn and remember.
Minister. Can I thank the Honourable for putting that on record? I completely agree with the words that he said, because survivors are the ultimate rebuke to such thoughts, and their testimonies that we do hear is a reminder of our duty to confront those who would tell lies about our history. And I would just like to take the time to share a little of Auschwitz survivor Lily Ebert's story. In 1944, when she was just 14 years old, the Nazis deported her and her family from her Hungarian hometown to Auschwitz. She was with her mother, brother and 3 sisters. Upon her arrival, they were split up, either directed left or right. Lily's mother, brother and sister were told to go right, and they were taken to the gas chambers and crematorium. Lily and her 2 sisters were directed the other way. They never saw the others again. The only possession Lily was able to keep with her on her journey was her gold pendant, given to her by her mother, which remarkably survived the camp with her hidden in the heel of her shoe. 75 years have passed since liberation. Lily is now a proud great-grandmother. She still wears the tiny gold pendant and shares its remarkable story with all of those who will listen. Any gold arriving in Auschwitz was stolen by the Nazis, so Lily believes that her pendant is unique in that it was the only gold to enter and leave the camp with its rightful owner. Like Lily herself, it survived against the odds. Many members of this House and many millions of people from around the world have visited Auschwitz-Birkenau and have seen the thousands upon thousands of shoes of all shapes and sizes piled on top of one another. Many of those shoes, like Lily's, hold the memories of those last murdered in Auschwitz. Hidden in the soles of those shoes are notes and photos, the last possessions of men, women and children murdered by the Nazis. I would also like to pay tribute today to the eyewitnesses for their resilience and their bravery, who are still, even in their 80s and 90s now, sharing their testimony in schools across the country with the Holocaust Educational Trust. We are also hugely grateful to the next generation of Holocaust Educational Trust ambassadors, thousands of young people who have heard testimony from survivors, who have visited Auschwitz and returned to share what they have learned. They are doing incredible work and carrying that responsibility and commitment to carry the legacy and stand up to hate today. How big word?
Further to that point, and indeed to the intervention of the Honourable Member for Huddersfield, will the government play its part in working with schools to bring the life of the work of the Trust to every part of our kingdom? It's vitally important that the next generation understand the future is in part shaped by what we learn from the past.
Absolutely, I would give that commitment, and I thank him for the opportunity to put it on the record, and that's why I think we should pay such particular tribute to those next generation of volunteers who are really taking on that legacy and serious responsibility upon themselves. And although Auschwitz is synonymous with the Holocaust, fewer people are aware of the Arleston Archive, the world's most comprehensive archive on the victims and survivors of Nazi persecution. The collection has information on around 17.5 million people and belongs to the UNESCO's Memory of the World. Apart from the paper records, the archive has 3,000 personal possessions belonging to former inmates of concentration camps. And thanks to the Stolen Memory campaign, the archive has returned precious recovered items to family members. You can imagine the immeasurable value these items have to the families. They are often the last remaining traces of parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters. Decades after the Nazis had confiscated a watch from his father, Jean-Pierre Lopez held it in his hands and wound it up again. He reported that it was extraordinary. He said it seems to still work perfectly even after 74 years, having it returned to him. In 1944, the Gestapo had arrested his father, José Lopez, as an anti-fascist and had deported him as a forced labourer. He only just managed to survive, ending with typhus and a body weight of just 40 kilograms. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is Stand Together. It is a reminder for us to stand together with each other and with our communities to remember the Holocaust. It is also a reminder that during the Holocaust and subsequent genocides, communities themselves were deliberately divided, with individuals persecuted because of their identity, and that despite the dangers of doing so, some people chose to stand together with those targeted, to challenge the divisive actions of genocidal regimes. We must remember their bravery and sacrifice and be inspired by it. But we also must make sure that we stand together to challenge hatred and prejudice wherever we find it today. which is why this government is so proud of the support it gives to